So Gordon and I met Chad Hawthorne at Stafford Youth Nursery, and he came out and looked at our garden and gave us some advice, and that's what he does. He has a degree in horticulture and a master's in landscape architecture from the University of Oregon, and he has his own small landscape design company called Align Nature Design, and he's worked with the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the field on ecological restoration and the recovery projects of threatened and endangered butterfly species. So he's very knowledgeable about the topic, and he's a very engaging speaker. So I give you Chad Hawthorne.
Hello, hello. Well, thank you so much for that. I won't say any more about myself because that was just fine. Before I get started, though, on this presentation, let's have a little interaction. So who here likes butterflies? Nice. So, no pressure here, but I'm going to go around and see. I'm just going to suss out the room and see who knows their butterflies here. All right. Start with the kids. The kids always know more than us. I'll go straight to them from my computer if this thing goes on. Okay. No calling it out. Raise your hand if anybody can tell me. Anybody recognize this species of butterfly? You are correct. It is a common.
What is it?
It's common.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, I don't know the name. Is that the cabbage? The ones that eat the cabbage?
Yes, that's cabbage butterfly. Nice. Yep. So this is a Pyrrhus rape. It's a global butterfly. It's one of our most common butterflies you'll see here. And they adorn your gardens in the spring and summer because they follow people everywhere because we grow cabbage and that's what they eat.
Broccoli.
And they're surprise food.
Oh.
All right.
I've almost heard they were a moth, no?
They are not a moth. They're a true butterfly. I think, and this is my opinion, I haven't really challenged anybody on it, but I think people don't want to associate butterflies as being evil. So I think they associate it as, oh, it's a moth. Nobody likes moths. They eat your clothes. They do all kinds of bad things. Now, actually, moths are just innocent nighttime. Well, there's also daytime moths, but now they get a bad rap. But no, it's a butterfly, so there's some evil butterflies out there.
Good to know.
All right. I only have 5 of these. 4 very, very common. One is extremely rare for our area, so I'm starting off with the common stuff. Anybody want to take a stab at this one? Okay, you raised your hand.
Swallowtail.
Yeah. What kind?
I don't know any kind.
That's okay. That's okay. There's no wrong answers. Only teaching and it's a tiger swallowtail. So this is a female western tiger swallowtail. There is the eastern tiger swallowtail, and that's not here. Obviously, that's in east. And there's also the Canadian tiger swallowtail. Guess where that one lives?
In Canada.
Hey!
Dragon prize too?
You almost get a plant. And some of you might know me. I am from Stafford, so yes, for
I don't
participating.
feel deserving.
No, you said swallowtail. You got it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, there's okay, gotta keep your hands down though first. Alright. Exactly. Alrighty. Anybody recognize this guy?
Monarch.
No.
No blurting. Alright, young lady, you raised your hand. Take a stab at it.
Monarch.
No. This is a painted lady.
Oh.
So this is Vanessa cardui. This is a painted lady. This is a migratory butterfly. It comes up just like the monarch is a migratory. This comes up from Mexico and breeds here during the summertime. It's a generalist. It eats everything, but mostly weeds. But it will eat sunflower, mallows, thistles.
No, I didn't win that. I didn't win that.
You raised your hand when you said monarch.
I said it wrong.
No, that's okay. There's no wrong answer. Alrighty, so we know that wasn't the monarch. What do you think this is? It's not. This is the Virginia lady. So the Virginia lady is related to the painted lady. They're both Vanessas. This one eats things like pearly everlasting and cudweed, and is mainly found in wetlands. But did a really good job. You'll notice that all the plants I've given away are really rock solid pollinator plants. These are highly, highly coveted by most bees, butterflies, and really anything that pollinates. All right, who wants to take a stab at that one? What do you got?
Monarch.
You're correct. So remember when I told you that we were going to have 4 really common butterflies that occur in our area, one really rare one? But what do we all garden for when we plant a butterfly garden? What do we? A monarch. Bad news. They don't occur here. We are in the, I would say Eugene is the last area for really good solid milkweed patches, naturally. So if we get any monarchs, they're stragglers. I've only run into one in 10 years, and it was in Graham Oaks, and it was just random, and I sort of did a handstand when I saw it, and I couldn't believe I was looking at one. But this is milkweed, the host plant to the monarch, so if you plant this, maybe you'll be the one who gets one. Alright guys, so I'm out of plants, I'm out of cards, so who wants to know how to butterfly garden? Alrighty, so I did not write the book on butterfly gardening. I wrote a book on butterfly gardening, and I pulled some pages out of that let's see if this works here. Is that working okay? And basically, I like to butterfly garden in a very scientific way. You don't have to do that, but that's the way I approach it. And how I butterfly garden is through life histories. And life histories are the life cycle, behaviors, and needs. So I'm just going to use my finger to scroll up and down here and just sort of like, I won't spend too much time on each slide. I got 50-something slides. I figured that's a minute per. That might take us into an hour. So we're just going to be moving fast. Okay, so like I said, butterfly gardening could be done in basically, in my opinion, 3 ways. We can focus on the flying adults. I think that's what most of us do because those are the ones that we see. And really how you do that is just plant flowers. It's pretty simple, but you may be missing some of the greater opportunities for attracting more species if you just plant random flowers. So another way to do it is focus on the flying adults and the caterpillars. And so what we have to do here is plant the flowers and the host plants. Anybody here know what a host plant is? Yes?
Probably the ones that the butterflies are attracted to lay eggs.
Correct, yeah. The host plant are a very specific plant group of plants or a single plant that the caterpillars, which is the juvenile form of a butterfly, exclusively feeds on for that section of its life. So they're extremely important if you want to go ahead and do more of a holistic butterfly approach. And another way is to do it is ecological restoration, which I've worked with for years. That's very intense and very laborious, and it's usually focusing on rare species. So most people in the yard won't do that. But I choose to blend them. So I like the life histories, and like I said before, that's the life cycle. That's the egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, adult. And then butterfly needs, which they need sunlight, they need water, they need shelter, they need food, they need to reproduce. And then the behaviors, which is puddling, basking, nectaring, perching, and patrolling. And I'll get into all that later. And here's a little checker spot. Just posing for a photo. Okay, so really why butterfly gardening? Why do it at all? So I've come up with some ideas here. Beauty, I mean, they're one of the most charismatic animals you can bring into your garden. I think stewardship is a really big one. It's a way to connect with the land. We've sort of built houses on their homes, and now to give back a little bit is maybe encourage them to be able to stake out a little niche in your yard. They also have an ecological value. They're pollinators, and they also, unfortunately for them, they serve a pretty substantial food source for birds, reptiles, and other things. So butterflies are getting eaten left and right. So enjoy them while you see them, because they're probably not going to be there tomorrow. And they're the ambassadors of the insect world. Nobody likes beetles. Nobody likes, the earwigs and all the other little rotty things, and the moth. But people really do like the butterfly. They're very engaging, so that's a good one. And unfortunately, they're very sensitive to climatic change, environmental change, and disturbance. So they're a real good indicator of environmental health. If you're void of butterflies, you probably got a big problem. But if you have a rich, diverse group of butterflies, then you're doing something right. And here's your goals. Strive for diversity in your garden. Use native plants whenever possible. The bigger you can go, the better, because they need some space to move around. They're flighted animals. They don't stay put. And garden for the butterflies that you're most likely going to see in your area. That's the big topic of today, is the elimination of the really, I want to garden for all butterflies. And that's not really practical, because all butterflies don't occur where you're at. And here's an example of a really nice, very pretty manicured home versus a wild meadow, and the butterflies have no use for the manicured yard. So maybe a blend of that is something we might go. I won't read all these. It's actually in your handout up there on the table. They're just the 10 principles of butterfly gardening. Really, basically, grow a lot of plants, grow the right plants, a variety of plants. No pesticides. Remember, they're very, very subject to degradation when pesticides are used. They will leave and or die if you use that. Another one, know the species of butterflies you're going to target. Provide plenty of sunshine. Butterflies are what's called heliothermic, meaning they need the sunlight. They need sunlight to warm their bodies. They can't regulate their body temperature. They need about 60 degrees to become active, up to 90, and so if it gets too hot, they need shade. So you got to provide a lot of sunshine for them. And you got to plant plants kind of strategically. Maybe massing, something they can see, so they can find them easier. They're animals, everybody needs water. So water is a key part. And this is the big one. This is the big one that I think most people are going to try to overcome. Let your yard be a little wild. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one for humans to let things go, because tall grass has tigers in it. So we're not big fans of things like that. And then don't be afraid to experiment. You can do the best thing in the world, be very diligent, and nobody will show up. So don't give up. You have to keep sussing out. So here's how my mind works. When I approach a butterfly garden, I look at it in very scientific ways. It doesn't translate onto the ground. It doesn't look like this on the ground, but it looks like this in my mind. So basically, there's phase 1 and phase 2. You have to determine your habitat. You have to determine your butterflies, determine your host plants, determine your nectar sources, and then you got to look at the life cycle. You have to look at their needs, and you have to look at very specific behaviors. If you check those boxes, you're ahead of the game. So in the Willamette Valley, I'm going to just say all the way from Eugene all the way up to even into southern Washington. We have basically 6 different kinds of habitats. Upland dry prairie, wet prairie, oak savanna, upland forest, riparian forest, and woodland. Unfortunately, we have about 1% of the wet prairie, upland prairie, and savanna left intact, and probably we don't even have an intact savanna or wetland. We're highly invaded by invasive species, and so we don't really know an intact ecosystem looks like. Most of that's been supplanted by farms, and has been for a long time, houses, industry. But we do have some remnants in some pockets, so the likelihood of you building your butterfly garden for the species that occur naturally in, say, a savanna, you would need to have your home sitting on what used to be a savanna for them to find you. So that's kind of a key thing. So basically, we've got about 18,000 species of butterflies in the globe. In the United States, about 750 species. Oregon, about 150. Now, I'm just saying species. There are subspecies and variants and forms and naturally occurring. So this is a kind of a conflated little number here. Oregon probably has a lot more different subspecies than species out there. So, but basically that's what you're going to find. In the Pacific Northwest Willamette Valley, we've got about 65 you'll run into. Most of those are found in wetlands and in preserves because those are mostly intact. Bad news, West Linn, you're only going to get about 20. I've done this for a long time. I've got research sites all over the planet, and I can only really squeeze out about 20 species in the West Linn area consistently. There are going to be some remnants here and there, but really this is the group that we're going to see. So how do you determine what's common, what's abundant, and what's rare? Well, you do the hard work. You do a lot of butterfly counts and censuses. So my research has shown that the little guys in green, the green bar, those are the common or abundant species. Anything that falls below that, it's not going to be too commonly occurring. And so in building your butterfly garden, so if we understand that we're going to target the common species, because gardening for the rare species is going to be fruitless almost. You take the amount of butterflies that you find in your area, which is over here in the far column, the far left column, and then you look at the common ones, you move the common ones over into the next target species, and then you move those target species into what habitat kind of garden are you going to do, and that's your targets. So it's sort of a matrix where you just sort of eliminate the harder ones, or you can do something real simple. You can just look at, are they feeding generalists, which means they eat a lot of different things, or are they specialists, which they only eat one thing, which makes them more rare. And if they're rare, probably avoid that, because that's probably not going to result in you finding that butterfly coming to your yard. If they're common, you got a better chance. No guarantees. Butterflies, like I said, they're going to do what they want. But you have a better chance by targeting the common species within your specific area. So who are these common species? Well, they're not that bad looking. The common ones are pretty cool. So we got the pale swallowtail, the white one, and then we already saw the tiger swallowtail. The Anna swallowtail. I took that picture this year. This is this year's picture over in the gorge, but we'll get them here. And they're actually your parsley eaters, so if you plant an herb garden and have parsley, you might get that one. But don't pick the caterpillars off the parsley, because that's what they turn into. Woodland skipper, they come in just droves during the later part of the year. Lots of little, if you have lavender, you'll see those little orange guys skipping all around. If you're a wooded area, anglewings, they really like that kind of shadowed area, and they eat stinging nettle. Not the most pleasant plant to be around, but boy, I tell you what, stinging nettle is one of the best host plants you can have. It's also a very nutritious plant for you. Just don't eat it when it has the stinging barbs on it. And here's the cabbage white. We saw that one. Little gray guy, that's the gray skip or hair streak, and that's a generalist. Dusky wing down there, that's an oak feeder. So here's the ladies, Vanessa group. So we saw the painted lady before. The red admiral is the one over here on your, my right. Virginia lady in the purple, and the West Coast lady. And then some of the little guys. These are the gossamer wings and the browns. We've got ourselves the silver blue, the echo blue, the common wood nymph, and we've got the ringlet. And last but not least, rounding out the final 20, we've got California Sister, Lorquin's Admiral, Mylida Crescent, and Common Skipper. So each one of these guys has a different habit, requires a different habitat, but they're all common within our areas. And you notice that I don't picture the monarch, and here's the very sad reason. Anybody see that little blue swath in the United States up there? No milkweed. So it's not an occurring butterfly in our area because the milkweed isn't indigenous to this area. Now that's not to say that the milkweed doesn't occur on the gorge. You'll get lots of milkweed in the gorge, and you'll find monarchs going up the gorge all the time. But the Willamette Valley, they kind of stomp around Eugene. I have found them, and I don't know if they were somebody released them on, but I did find caterpillars at the Orchid Gardens once. But it's very unlikely. But that doesn't mean we can't keep continuing to push for making these monarch way stations, because the monarch way stations, butterflies, they're going to have to adapt and push out into new territories, and if there's a host of monarch way stations with a lot of milkweed, a lot of host plants for them, they can reestablish in here. So, you never know. And so in my mind, I look at each butterfly as a real big mystery. So I want to solve that mystery. And I want to do everything I can to pick it apart, make sure that I have everything I need information-wise. Its flight time, its life cycle, its abundance, its broods. Broods are how many times it can reproduce in one season. Are they a secure conservation status animal, or are they rare? And so what I've done is I built sheets for every butterfly that basically, if you're going to target, you got to know who you are. So it's a very fine detail on each species. So once again, we've seen these two species, so everybody gets some really high detailed information, so we can really kind of suss out how we're going to attack the garden. Here's the pale swallowtail. Not as common around here, but can be found. And then if you live in the Intermountain or even on the coast, the Parnassian, which is a real interesting butterfly. It's one of the oldest butterflies in existence. It's kind of ancient. It's not a living fossil, but it's darn near close. Its host plant is bleeding heart, and so it's a very pretty plant. So you can actually make some of your host plants a very attractive garden plant too. You're not going to really have success down here in the valley, but still plant bleeding heart, and it's a very specific bleeding heart. It's the Dicentra formosa, which is a Pacific bleeding heart. A lot of nurseries will sell the Asian species or the European species, and then those are no benefit except for just being beautiful. So you gotta go native on that.
So what's different?
What's the difference?
Yeah.
So butterflies are very sensitive to.
No, I mean with the
Yes.
The Dicentra. Which is the Dicentra?
Dicentra formosa is the Pacific bleeding heart. That's our native bleeding heart. And the Asian varieties, which you'll find a lot of in the stores.
So that's the more common one.
Most likely that's going to be the more common one. And it's also the hybridized one, so it's sort of like garden savvy. However, I'll tell you, my Dicentra, my native Dicentra in my yard, outperforms any other bleeding hearts. So, unfortunately, just not a lot of nurseries grow it. Don't lie. But it's a real good performer.
The Stafford?
What's that?
The Stafford?
No. But they have plenty of the others.
So the flowers different? Can you tell by
The flowers are very different. It looks more like a kind of sort of like a cordalis.
Okay.
It resembles a cordalis flower.
Okay.
It's not as heart-shaped,
Yes.
not as definitively heart-shaped, but it's almost there.
I
Yeah.
know what you mean.
Yeah. So, I think many people know this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. The butterflies, we see the adults and we say, oh, there's the butterfly. But if you see a clutch of eggs on a leaf, that's the butterfly. And if you see a worm, it's not really a worm, it's a caterpillar, on your leaves, munching away, that's a butterfly. And then we see this very odd amorphous thing hanging, that's also a butterfly. So the conception of what a butterfly is, because it goes through what's termed complete metamorphosis, it changes its shape and form through this, we don't even understand how it can do this, and transforms itself into a totally new creature in every part of its life cycle, which is pretty ingenious because it can overwinter as an egg, it can overwinter as a chrysalis, it can overwinter as a caterpillar, it can overwinter as an adult. Or it can go through, say, like really hot, dry summers. It can go into a state of dormancy in any of those phases. More than likely not the adult phase, but the other. So it's a real good survival technique for butterflies because the conditions may not be right for any one of those phases. So they just wait it out. But this is called complete metamorphosis, and that's the egg, the caterpillar, the chrysalis, and adult. And this is all the checker spot and what it looks like in its 4 phases. So, if you want to do more holistic, complete butterfly gardening, you're going to need the host plants. And the host plants are very specific to the species that you're going to target. I just chose 2 species here that are hard to garden for. The Fender's Blue and the Monarch. I mean, it's easy to garden for them. You can plant the Kincaid lupin and you can plant milkweed. Pretty simple. You're just not going to see them show up. Generally, for a couple different reasons. The Fender's Blue only flies roughly about 100 feet from its host plant. And so because we built many roads and many buildings and schools and subdivisions and across its native Willamette Valley, it can't go from point A to point B very well. So basically the only way to really garden for that one is an ecological restoration project, which there are many of them, and they're doing a really good job, and they're actually taking it off of the critically endangered to just threatened species level. So that's because of a lot of intervention. A very common butterfly, and probably the most known, everybody can say the word monarch. Everybody, I've done lots of census, and most people can say the species monarch. It's very well known, but it's also very challenging. It's much more common. It's found throughout the United States. It can be very common in some places, but it's going to be a challenge here just because of its just natural range. But like I said, that doesn't mean we can't garden for it. Because the milkweed is a good pollinator plant for all the other species. So even if you're not getting it as a host plant, it makes a really good nectar source for all the other species of butterflies that would show up. So keep planting milkweed. So in my guidebook, I've got these graphs that tell you kind of sort of how to line up with your habitat to what plants grow in that habitat, and that's how you kind of form like a plant palette. You can plant other plants outside of that, and it might work, but really I like to create these grids so I can really be very specific about how I'm going about introducing certain species into the habitat.
So this is in your book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I further take the host plants and I pick those apart, just like I did the butterflies. I'm going to break them down into all kinds of light requirements, sun requirements, habitat they occur in, kind of sort of what community they want to grow with, their habits, and what butterfly species are going to utilize them. And so when you see this as a host plant, that means that these species of butterflies shown down in the little boxes, they're going to target these species as a food source for the caterpillar phase of the butterfly. So this is just a good way to have something for the adults to lay eggs on so the caterpillars can at least get through that life cycle. And here's just some more examples. You'll notice that the silvery blue, number 29, occurs on a lot of different species of plants, which makes it really easy to butterfly garden for, as long as it has an intact ecosystem. But it's a generalist. So a generalist feeds on many different species of plants, which makes them more successful. If you're a specialist and you only eat one kind of thing, and that one kind of thing goes away, you're kind of out of luck. But if you're a generalist and you eat lots of different things, and half of those things go away, well, you still got other things on the menu. So that's another way to target for common species is, are they generalists or are they specialists? And once again, the silvery blue shows up in many photos. It's a survivor. So another thing I look at is in the behaviors. So basically, I've written a graphic language of behaviors. The nectaring as a symbol, the food as a symbol, and the adult who's using that. And so that language just sort of goes through, and this isn't a language you need to speak, it's a language that's in my mind. So when I'm doing these gardens, I'm really sort of being very specific. This one shows nectaring. And really what you see here is the right kind of color, because butterflies are very prone to purple, yellow, white, and pink. If you happen to love red, sorry, bees love red. But butterflies, they'll go to red too, but if you give them a choice, they'll go to purple. And then here's a group of little guys doing exactly that. So this is just a behavior. This is called nectaring. Adults, majority of adult butterflies, they don't have a lot of fat storage. That's all in the caterpillar phase, is where they have all that fat storage. And so what adults need is they need a really high, nutritious, energy-yielding food source, which that's nectar. And so that's why you're going to see, these butterfly gardens very flower rich. That's because that's legit. They spend most of their time seeking flowers. So basically, in my research and studies, purple wins. If you're going to plant one flower for your butterfly garden, so you only have a deck, I'd put lavender on that deck. Lavender is going to have the longest bloom time, and it's going to be right down their color. Also, butterflies are inherently lazy. They like a meal where they don't have to leave, and lavender puts it on. And lavender has this really long flower spike of 1,000 flowers on one. They don't even have to fly, they can just crawl from flower to flower. And so choose the right shape and right kind. These little Asteraceae, these daisies, that's a pretty ingenious also flower. It's got two different kinds of flowers built into it's known as a head, and it's got discs and rays. And the ray gets their attention, and the disc is literally thousands of nectar sources on each one. And so what I've done is I've the size of the circle just means it's a hierarchy. That's the most prevalent that the butterflies will use. Orange. Now I'm going to say this is built for Oregon. I will say that in the tropics, we got to flip the whole game around. Oranges and reds are probably really sought after. I studied in Hong Kong, and red was a big tropical flower, and it was a really well sought after. The principle on this whole field guide is the same. You just need to flip around the players in it. So once again, just like the host plants, I made a grid of the nectar sources. These are all natives, and basically who occurs in what habitat, and that's your targets. It's not exclusive. You don't have to stick to it, but I stick to that. Now that's natives. There's a lot of exotics out there that butterflies really like. Teasel, that little thistly thing, pennyroyal, they really like butterfly bush. And now these are things you'll find like in weedy areas, growing wild. But your yard also has exotics. Lavender, number one. Lavender's number one. Tall verbena. Somebody got the tall verbena.
Yes.
Yeah. Echinacea, and believe it or not, an annual makes it onto this. The zinnia. The zinnia is a real good pollinator source. Very sought after. But here's a group of the common that you'll see in the Willamette Valley. These are the big players that these butterflies will use over and over and over again. So what's the main danger of having exotics in the habitat that pollinators favor over the natives? They're going to keep getting fertilized, they're going to keep getting pollinated, they're going to keep reproducing more, and the natives are going to go away and away and away. So this is really it's a tough thing to overcome in a disturbed habitat. But they do serve a good source. And then what I do is I look at, well, how do I structurally take nectaring as the behavior? So I look at it as a vegetation gradient, and I always look at sunshine. I always look at access. So we can see in a prairie design, prairie is wide open, so you can have massive, expanses of floral going all areas. In a woodland, you want to stick to clearings. The vegetation gradient always needs to be tallest to smallest, the tallest to the fence or a border, and the smallest to the trail or the path. So sunlight, I mentioned sunlight is one of those absolute needs of butterflies, being that they are, I don't want to use the word cold-blooded, they're heliothermic. They require that sunshine. They're only active when the sun is out. And so I spent all day in this little clearing of a forest in a patch of lemon balm, of all things. Not a native, but I tell you, it was a good pollinator. But the woodland skippers, I just watched and observed them for an entire time. I went from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., just sat there. And I did my butterfly counts, and I got a really good idea of how these guys become active during certain times of day. So what does this mean? Well, if you're going to put a butterfly garden on, say, like the east side of your house, and it only gets morning sun up to 10, it's probably not going to do very well, because you can see from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. is when they need that sunlight to be directly on something. So you have to really think about where you're going to place butterfly gardens within a certain habitat for them to be utilized effectively. So sunlight kind of drives another butterfly behavior, which is called basking. And basking is where they will soak up the sun and heat up their bodies to flight temperature. And once they hit flight temperature, then they're off. A lot of them will bask in different areas. Open ground is a great place for some species. High up on a shrub is another great place. Mid elevation is another. You'll find that butterflies basically are they're habitual. They will do the same things as a species goes. So if you can provide different gradients of different areas where they can bask at certain times of the day, you're more likely to get them to stay. That's kind of the whole goal in a butterfly garden, has to have them stay. It's kind of a bummer to see a really beautiful tiger swallowtail shoot on by and never just wave at you as it goes by. You kind of want to see them around. So you have to provide them with something that's going to, like, hey, this is a good spot, I like this spot, so they're going to stay. And here's that vegetation gradient. Here's some species, and they're going to use consistently different heights of vegetations. So here's the monochromatic lawn argument of, well, maybe a few species, maybe a skipper will like the lawn, but everybody else is going to leave. They're going to depart. So having variance of vegetation, having strategically in areas where they get sunlight at certain times of day, really good way to think about it. It gets even more complex. So basking, I did a little solar aspect here. Having things that are arranged in this is all in design, that can take a morning aspect, a midday aspect, and a kind of an after hours aspect, where they can catch the sun at different times of the day. Is good. And then you'll see that butterflies bask in different ways. Some will close their wings and angle their body. Some will flatten their wings completely, and some will catch them like a solar panel. But it's all for one reason. It's all to get their body temperatures up to peak, so they can fly, feed, look for mates, all kinds of stuff like that. So another behavior is huge for butterflies, and that's called puddling. I don't know if you've ever gone hiking on a trail and you walk across a wet spot and butterflies will kick up. And you say, okay, well, yeah, everybody likes water. But butterflies are actually after something different than just water. They do utilize water, but they're actually going for dissolved minerals. And so those dissolved minerals are a massive part of butterfly reproduction. It helps the male mature the sperm to give to the female so she can have a viable clutch of eggs. And without open ground and exposed, like bare earth that's wet, just drinking basically dew off of a leaf isn't going to work. So they do need those minerals. And so what I always try to do is I always try to have a kind of a half earth, half gravel, a nice wide span in sunlight. Make sure it's always sun. And then I make sure that it's got a water source that makes the earth wet. And you'll get a lot of activity. You might even get more activity with a piece of wet ground than you would a flower patch. And here they are again, doing what they do. So, I mean, literally all butterfly species puddle, and it's mostly males. But they all puddle in basically the same way. They're looking for that one thing. They've got sensors on their antenna that can sense the chemicals. They also have sensors on their feet that can sense the chemicals. So another way to help out this kind of seeding the gravel is if you have a fire pit and you have some burnt coals in there and you crush those up and you sprinkle them on there, that's a great source of potassium. So potassium is one of the things they're after. So that's kind of a trick to get them to be attracted to that wet earth. Now, I'm using the word wet earth a lot. It's because we don't want to puddle. A quarter inch is too deep. They can't swim, they can't wade. They need to be atop of, but have access to just wet earth. So basically, I've seen a lot of butterfly gardens where they'll have like a bird bath converted, where it actually has like stones for them to sit on. It's not really going to be effective, and it's more dangerous than anything. Now, bees and wasps and things like that, and of course birds, they'll really benefit from that because they're going for straight water. But the butterflies are going for minerals. They can be too deep. So once again, in a design scenario, you can't make your puddle station across shadow. So be strategic. So here's a right way and a wrong way to make your puddle station. The solar aspect is coming straight through. If you notice the north arrow, I always plant my trees to the north. Unless something really weird happens on this planet, north will never cast a shadow. So we really want to have, wherever we're setting up these strategic areas, we don't want them being where midday shadow is going to occur. And once again, there's that little bar. There's that little bar of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's your target. Perching is another behavior that butterflies do, and this, kind of like puddling, is a mating need. And so different species perch at different elevations. Some perch on the ground, some perch on mid-level, some perch kind of in the canopy. So if you have a target species, then you're going to need to know where they perch. And then you're going to need to design in the right area, the right time of day, for that height. You'll have a better chance. I'm not saying, there's no guarantees. But I will say that it's a better outcome, possibly. And here we are, we're perching still, and we've got kids looking at it. I throw kids into a lot of my entourage. Because kids are really, I did a lot of design work for schools, butterfly gardens for schools. And kids are the answer to that. I mean, they're curious, they're sponges, they bond with a concept, and it's lifelong. And it's a really great place to do butterfly gardens, or food gardens, or any kind of really cool garden. And then schools also have a lot of space. Tremendous amount of space. Lots of lawn. You can convert some of that lawn. So here's some species that are perching. Now, we know we're not basking here because we're not solar flaring, right? We're not putting our wings out and we're not gaining anything. They've already probably sunned themselves and now they're ready for action. And what their action is these are all males. So males perch, and if a female flies by, they're warm, they have their area of advantage, and they'll go pursue. And so having the right kind of host plant, that's what the females come after, as the host plant. And then what you do is you put perching stations near the host plant, so the males can sit on that, and then they'll meet. If you don't do one or the other, you won't get much of a result. You just get things that'll fly by randomly. But if you put those two together, you might actually get some populations that's established in your yard, which is kind of the goal. And then here is patrolling. So patrolling is random to the eye, but patrolling is very species specific. So some species will patrol close to vegetations. Other species will patrol at mid-levels or canopy. Some species will go back and forth. Others will cruise on through and make a loop. Tiger swallowtails are great for making a loop. This summer, if you have nothing to do all day long, get an Adirondack chair or a folding chair. If you see a tiger swallowtail going through your yard, and just wait to see if that same tiger swallowtail doesn't come back through that same spot it came through within about 10 to 15 minutes. And they'll do that all day long if it's the right kind of habitat for them. So if you build your habitat right, they'll patrol right through. And I've spent many summers just watching the same butterfly go through day after day after day. So everybody needs shelter. It's one of those 3 hierarchy needs: food, water, shelter. Every creature needs it. Butterflies are no different than that. So providing some sort of cover during inclement events, and the Pacific Northwest can definitely be inclement at times. But shelter is not just from rain, shelter is also from heat. So remember, the butterflies can't regulate their own temperatures, right? So in a heat dome, we get past 100 degrees, they're going to need some kind of shadow. So shadows are also something that we want to put kind of near our food source and our host plants, so that vegetation gradient falls right in, tallest to shortest. And so maybe that's a good way to keep them in your yard if you have that shelter for them. Butterflies don't weigh very much, so they can get really bounced around by the wind. So their strategy is to go into areas where it isn't so windy. So you guys know what a hedgerow is? It's big in England. And it's basically so we don't have to, face gale force winds. And that's us. we're big creatures, and we can actually stand up against gale force winds. If you're a butterfly, you have to go with gale force winds. You're going that way. You're going where the wind takes you. So having a sort of a windbreak to where you know where your winds come from, and there are things called windrows where you can calculate what direction the winds come from different areas. Now remember, butterflies occur during certain times. So we're not really interested in maybe a windbreak during the winter months, but we are interested in a windbreak on the summer months where we get our winds. And you can reduce the wind pretty significantly by just having a fairly modest amount of pretty thick but modest amount of vegetation. And if you do that, this whole little gray area, all those behaviors, they'll continue to do that. If you don't have that, they're going to go to a different habitat where they can get some protection from wind. So wind is a big one. So when I do site design, all of that language that's iconic in my head, this is how I look at the landscape. I look at it in pieces, almost like there's a computer screen in front of my eyes. And I'm trying to visualize where I need to put certain things, arrange them in a certain way, for a certain time, for a certain thing. And if you do that, you start to really increase your odds. So here I have purple, massing of purple. I have rocks. Remember, that's my wet earth. I've got a trail. They will follow the trails. I've got a windbreak to the north, and I've got perching stations on the sides. So I look at these things in sort of like little icons. Here's how the rest of us look at it. Just a happy scene. But the happy scene is created by using a systematic approach, a non-random. And we can see our little butterfly is perching where it wants to, and it's probably basking too. So here's one of the schools that I designed for in Eugene. Just an open, kind of a feral field, not really getting any use. It had a little bit of a drain that goes through, so I knew I had a water source there. So that's why I have my puddle source. And it's pretty void of vegetation. All it had was some grasses, and then in the early spring it just had some English daisy. Well, butterflies don't really occur in the early spring when the English daisy is. Maybe back home in England, there's a species that uses them, or maybe a bee or something like that. But English daisy won't do anything for our butterfly target species. So I put camas in instead. Nectar, same thing. So I just draw who's my heavy hitters for the color variant that I want for this particular group of butterflies in this particular region, which is purple, yellow, white, and pink. And I put them in massings because the butterfly's acuity is really sharp around the 12-foot range. So if you just put one thing here and one thing there and one thing there in a sea of green, maybe they won't come to it. But if you put them in a massing where you can spot them from great distances, the likelihood of them coming to that is really increased. And so we converted, and you notice that in the first picture, we got ourselves 3 trees. We don't want those trees there. I put the trees to the edges. The trees to the edges also help conceal the housing tract that was over there. So another design benefit. Makes you feel like you're in the middle of a prairie instead of a suburb, but that's okay. Once again, I think in icons, and this is a section of the meadow, and it has all the players that I wanted to do with all the species that I wanted to garden for in a very strategic area. So remember that need for shade, that's a temperature regulation. They need to cool off when they're overheating. So once again, I've got myself a very strategic in the hottest part of the day. I've got a shadow that's not going to perturb my nectar source, my puddle station, my perching stations. It's just going to cast it where the butterflies will go, where it's not interfering with any of my other little strategies. But it is a good strategy to have is shade. I don't know if you've ever experienced getting hot in the summer and you go find yourself shade. They do the same thing. So once again, shelter. Remember I took these 3 pines out, which are really not going to provide me anything. They're in the middle. All they do is cast shadow. And so I've got my shelter on the edges. I've got my shelter on the north side. Once again, I'm not casting shadow on all my other stations for all my other behaviors. But when we get our winds from the summertime from the north, really, really intense. So I've got them on the north side. So the puddle station is just as, I'm not going to say complicated, it's complex, just as complex as the others. I want to have my stream as my source, and I don't want my stream to be the puddle station. I want my puddle station off the source, because I want my puddle station to be 1/4 of an inch depth or lower, or just wet. So it's off to the side. And then I put a trail off to the side of that, so I don't have vegetation growing into my puddle station and pushing the butterflies further and further into the stream, which they won't. They'll just find a new puddle station. Also, because this was on a school, it's nice to have the trail next to the puddle station so the kids can go observe the butterflies almost at point blank. And I'm telling you, when a butterfly is puddling, they're oblivious to everything else. So you have to be really actually almost careful with them on the puddle station because they can get stepped on. Because they're very focused on one thing. But it's a great way to observe them because you're right there. And so remember, I had that little cut. It was just a drainage, and all it had was cattails and some other riparian plants going down with it. So I decided we're going to clear that out. We're going to make it the proper depth, and then we're going to put that trail that goes right along the side of it. So perching, no different than any other design implementation. I'm taking a place where I know I can have the greatest aspect. I'm going to put my perching stations near my nectar sources. Remember, the females are going for the nectar source. The males are going to be the perchers. So I want to have them kind of at a strategic place. And that vegetation gradient, I've got my perchers from the trail, because trail perchers, they like open ground, so I've got that. And I've got my vegetation gradient for all the other species. That's the goal. That's the goal of our entire design, is to have a beautiful, ecologically intact and functional garden by using the life histories of butterflies. That's it. Any questions? Yes?
What do they do at night and where do they go?
Yeah, so at certain times of day, when we don't have sun or warmth, they're just going to go seek somewhere where they can be hidden away from predators. So butterflies have no defenses except for getting away. Oh, that's not true. Butterflies have all kinds of defenses. But at night, they're the most vulnerable. So they're going to hide. And so they'll go into things like thickets. They might nestle down into deep parts of grass if it's a prairie species. If it's a forest species, they'll go under leaves. They'll tuck themselves up against trunks. They'll find somewhere where they're not obvious. But yeah, they just have to wait that out. Because they start getting inactive when birds are still very active. So they're going to start looking for a perch to sleep on pretty early, because the birds, they're active all the way until dark, and then at even pre-dawn, birds are out. So they have to remain hidden until sunlight warms them up. So yeah, they nestle down in. Yes.
And the name of your book is, and then there were butterflies?
That is correct, yeah. So basically that book was meant for academics, for the University of Oregon graduate students to use on how to build a butterfly garden. And so really what I asserted was that that book can be used by anybody, anywhere. You just change, you keep the system the same, but you change the players. So the butterflies will change, the time of year will change, because we've got a couple hemispheres. The host plants will change, the conditions will change, but the system remains the same. So anybody who just plugs in the system can use that. So like you're from Indiana, so you have a different host of species. So you won't be targeting the species in the Oregon one, but you use the same system. And here's the it's just a light read. Really in depth, a lot of study. Yeah. For everybody else, I would say that's a very good book for the Pacific Northwest. This is Michael Pyle's Pacific Northwest. I use this one almost every day, even in the wintertime, because I can't wait for spring. So this has all the players that you'll run into and many more that you may never see. But this is a really well-written book. And then anybody who's really into butterfly gardening, they've got to have some sort of native plant cookbook. It's got to be part of your arsenal. A lot of nurseries will have a lot of exotic plants, and they can work fine for some things. But this is the core. This is really where your species are really going to cling to. And this happens to be a local author up in Mosier who I just happened to go visit, and he had a couple of copies, and so he signed one for me. It's called Humble Roots Nursery, and it's just this really, really nice little nursery in Mosier. Yes.
Okay, so what you showed are large areas.
Correct.
So if you don't have, I have an interesting kind of situation. I volunteered to take care of some raised beds at the West Linn Community Center.
Correct.
Somebody decided sometime before I came they would make one of those raised beds all milkweed, and it's all milkweed. And the milkweed is even growing up through the stones underneath. I've never seen a butterfly there, not one.
Yeah.
Is there any way of creating something? There are 5 raised beds, but then there is some area around. Is there any way of creating something there, or?
Well, of course. Yeah, so you have milkweed there presently. So your spot is a perfect place to build what's called a monarch way station. And a monarch way station, yes, is specifically for the monarch to come in. And the monarchs will hit Eugene around July. So if you get a straggler around July, you want to make sure that you have blooming plants in the month of July. And big plants. Monarchs are big butterflies.
This is a whole big.
Yes, but
But don't I need something else?
Yes. So you would partner that way station with other kinds of blooming plants, and then another bed could be host plants of the species that I think are more likely to show up. Now, if you want to just have fun, plant nasturtiums in one, and you'll get the cabbage butterfly. Yes,
I had nasturtiums last year in one of the beds.
Yes, but that's a host plant because that's in the cabbage family.
Yes.
I mean, if you've ever eaten a nasturtium, they kind of taste like arugula because they're related. And the cabbage will use that as a host plant. So that's one. You just have to know the host plants. So maybe you can convert maybe a bed into certain kinds of native host plants. Another bed could be native floral. To have just a monochromatic patch of something is missing the greater game, because if you look at the 10 principles, diversity is your goal. So the Monarch Way Station is never just milkweed. The Monarch Way Station is milkweed plus a
Well, I was
slew of
thinking
other
I might
things.
take out some of the milkweed in that one bed and mix in flowers.
100%. 100%. And you'll notice that milkweed travels.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, no, it's built, milkweed has the weed built into its name. For a reason. You plant it 1 year and it's over here 3 feet away.
It's coming up through the rocks and the
Yes.
stones. And
It is not what I say a fastidious plant. It would not be in a formal garden because it will go everywhere. And that's fine. That's what you want. Milkweed's a traveler, and so is its monarch.
But so do I need some of the other elements too? I mean, do I?
Yep. You need to have all the elements present for your target species. So you got to know your target species. So you don't necessarily garden for everybody. So if you know what habitat you were in, maybe it was a upland prairie, and you know it's kind of a wide open space where maybe it has a lot of grasses around. Maybe you plant specific kinds of grasses that target specific kinds of butterflies as a host plant, and specific kinds of nectar sources. And then you've got to have the puddle station. I advocate for always engineering into at whatever scale you can pull off. Now, when you talk about small,
Well, they have a drip in the beds, so
it's a drip in the beds, but is it on the ground in gravel and
it's on the ground in the beds.
okay, that's great. Then
So I just need a place to put
is it exposed? Is it exposed?
In some places, I'd have to keep it exposed. Okay.
Exposure is key.
Okay.
So remember that I kept the puddle station free of encroachment from other plants. So we want to have bare earth. Arguably gravel is a great way to mix that in. Decomposed granite's a great way to mix that in. But real bare earth and stones that is wet at the certain time of day that it needs to be wet without being deep. Yeah. So what you do is you just take those little elements and you have to do it on your scale. Not everybody can do a large heart. And so not everybody should be gardening for every single species that they love. Say they love the tiger swallowtail. Plant a sycamore tree. Plant a willow. That would be the host plant. You'll notice that the tiger swallowtail is very abundant in neighborhoods because our shade trees, a good proportion of them are host plants. So they're very used to.
There's some red currants here.
So red currant blooms really early in the year. Most butterflies aren't out that time of year. There are some species, the echo blue is one of our earliest, but the tiger swallowtail is still asleep long after the currant is done. So tiger swallowtail is going to be waking up here in the month of June.
So
Currant has been out of flower for a long, long time.
That's very useless to me.
Well, it's useless to that species, but it's not useless to other species, like the echo blue. It's actually right down their wheelhouse. So if you target the echo blue, then your currant comes in really important. Yeah. Yes.
So if they're sleeping in the winter, what do you want to keep in your garden for them to sleep in?
Well, you know how we like to clean up our yards in the fall? We just really removed probably, there's really no way to know, but over half of the sleepers. In whatever form. So let's just say, hypothetically, you had a successful brood of ringlets come in to your yard and lay eggs in your, let's say your out of bounds pasture grass, and then you mow it. The mowing is not something that happens in nature. Fire happens in nature. That's how we keep these grasslands intact and these savannas intact. The fire doesn't get them all. But if you mow that section consistently, that's like a fire over and over and over and over and over again. Nobody's going to be able to withstand that attrition. So once again, the 10 principles, the messiness, butterflies really like it. Now I'm not talking 12-year-old boy that never cleans up his room messy. I mean, there can be some fastidiousness, but maybe you have parts of the yard that are purposely out of bounds that aren't, say, necessarily on full display. Or, here's one of the biggest tricks in the whole wide world. Put a little ecological restoration sign in your front yard and everybody will say, oh, they're doing something. I've done lots of studies where we can put just a little gravel trail through an empty patch of a lot that's been abandoned, and then a signage, and it's very embraced. If you don't do that, people just are waiting for it. When are they going to develop this? So so maybe you put that sign in there. So it's hard. This is something that's entrenched in our psyche of keeping our environment safe and clean. It is. That's a real thing. Our primal brain doesn't want to be in areas where we can't see. It's called prospect and refuge. We like to be able to see everything coming from a vantage point. So having a really overgrown, thatchy thing, somehow deep in our brain says that's not good. And it's a little bit of culture too. It's just been tradition for everybody to have their clipped lawn and boxed hedges. And so overcoming that, it's one of the harder things to do. But no, butterflies like it messy, but they don't want it too messy. So there's a fine line between messy and overgrown. Because plants in our ecosystems, they're controlled from being overgrown. Once again, fire. In this, where we stand right here, the Kalapuya Indian used to burn this area every year until white settlement, and then the burning stopped, and then the encroaching Douglas fir came in, and now we have the added bonus of having all of the avian cherry, the hawthorn, and everybody's favorite, the Himalayan blackberry everywhere. Oh, I left out ivy. Sorry, ivy's a big one.
Scotch broom, don't forget.
And Scotch broom. Yeah. So there's a lot of invasive species here that can swamp your area. So when you go out to the woods and look at an area that's pretty pristine when we camp and things like that, it seems orderly. It seems like it's purposeful. Everything seems to be in check. But then we get around here where nobody's allowed to have a forest fire, and the blackberries have swallowed up the abandoned house. That doesn't really happen in nature, because nature really ebb and flows the amount of growth. So butterflies will move on from that kind of scenario too. So there's a balance. There's a balance between messy. So you're kind of caught in a little bit of a when do I or what do I? So what I say is pick your sections where you can get away with having it taller, more overgrown and messy. And then really what I say, clean it up when you see the adults flying, because we know we haven't hit egg or caterpillar phase yet. When you just start to see the adults fly, then you can clean it, because those adults may have hatched out from that grassy patch, and they might have sat there and from late summer, all of fall, all of winter, and then hatched out in just say mid-May. So mid-May might be a target time to go in there and clean it, but you got to know what species use what. So if you're going to clean up the grass patch in mid-May, well, you've just taken out all of your common wood nymphs because they don't hatch out until July, August. I mean, you got to wait it out a little longer. It's tough. This is one of the more complex things you can ever do is grow a butterfly garden. But you can make it as easy on yourself as possible and just plant flowers. I mean, really, it's a good out. It's not a bad out. It's a good out. It's just not the complete. So pick your battles. Yeah. Yes.
I'm specifically trying to attract the painted lady.
Oh, you're in luck.
Am I?
Yes.
Okay. What
So
should I be planting?
Yeah. So painted ladies, they'll eat lots of things, and they're migratory. So they're going to hit right now. They're hitting. So they're going to be looking for things like mallows, and the mallow group is everything from hollyhocks to Sedalcia. Sedalcia is our checker mallow. That's our native. So you can go native, and the checker mallow really looks good and acts well in your yard. It's a really attractive plant. But hollyhocks will be used. Also, what they like is sunflower. So tall sunflowers, yeah. I've raised them out on sunflowers left and right. And also thistle. There's lots of native thistle. There's a lot of invasive species thistle, but they don't care. They'll use all thistles.
It's not the nettle, is it? Or...
No, nettle is different. So nettle, that'll get you too. Thistles will stab you, and it hurts.
Yeah.
Nettles will stab you and let you in on a little secret that they got. It's good for you. So pick your nettles at the right time of year when they're young, and then you can eat them. And then when they get older, the butterflies will move in and take care of the rest.
Okay.
And so, but the painted lady won't use the nettle. Now, the West Coast lady, the red admiral, and the comma will all use the nettles.
Okay.
So it's a good plant to plant. But it's not a plant you want to plant next to the hose bib or along the driveway or wherever you are going to be. That's a backboard plant. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, painted lady's going to be a really good one for you.
Okay.
So
I planted sunflowers.
Sunflowers, that'll
It's
work.
like that big right now.
That's okay. Snails might get those. Watch out. But if you see a leaf that's curled, like sewn together, that's a caterpillar.
Okay.
Because what they do, ever see those wasps that build their homes underneath our eaves? Those are hunters extraordinaire. And those are paper wasps, and they're caterpillar hunters, perfect. They can smell them, they can see them, they know exactly where to look for them. And so what the painted lady does is it makes itself a tent. It eats from the inside out. And then at night, when the wasp is asleep, crawls out, makes a new tent, goes in. So yeah, but yeah, so they've evolved to like get away from the wasps. But yeah, so I like mallows, so that's going to be your list. Mallows, thistles, and sunflowers. And painted ladies are definitely hitting right now. Now they're migratory. So some years you're going to get a lot of them, and some years you're going to get a very few. But we always get some. And I've successfully raised those out every year on those groups.
Thistles.
Yep.
And sunflowers.
Yeah. And thistles, they have spines, so that's not the kindest. Sunflowers, they're kind. And then all the mallows, none of those have thorns, so that might be a good one.
I wanted to compliment you as a speaker that I was inspired to see your work with youth of all ages in our garden club, to see youth of all ages in the education. I've been part of the pollinator posse for 20 years in California and Oregon, and your design work and the ideas that this is one of the best presentation that I've seen, and to see the good work you're doing with youth and classrooms and garden clubs. You've helped to lower the average age of our garden club by, I think, 20 or 30 years. So bring your grandchildren and your spouse and your grandmother or grandfather to our meetings, and thank you for an exceptional presentation.
Thank you.